Hey, I'm David. I never imagined that an ordinary security camera would become the source of the most terrifying experience of my life. I installed those cameras purely for safety. There had been a series of thefts in the neighborhood, and since I live alone, I wanted to be cautious. But what I saw in that footage, it wasn't a thief. Today I'm going to tell you about that incident. It happened to me, and even now I still don't fully understand what it was that I saw. I installed the security cameras on a quiet Sunday afternoon. It felt like a productive, adult thing to do. I mounted one above the front door, another facing the living room, and a third pointing toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. Each camera connected to an app on my phone, streaming live footage and saving recordings to the cloud. At first, I checked the app obsessively. Every notification made me curious. Most of the alerts were harmless, shadows shifting, headlights from passing cars, or me walking from room to room. After a week, the novelty wore off. The cameras faded into the background of my daily life. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I squinted at the screen, a motion alert from the living room camera. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. I frowned. I was home alone. I hadn't left any windows open. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. The house was old, it creaked and settled at night. The camera probably picked up a shadow. Still, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I opened the app. The live feed showed my living room exactly as I'd left it. The couch sat against the wall. The coffee table was cluttered with magazines. The dim glow of a streetlight filtered through the curtains. Nothing moved. I exhaled slowly, feeling a little foolish. I was about to close the app when I noticed the playback icon blinking. The camera had recorded a clip. Curiosity overrode my sleepiness. I tapped it. The footage started a few seconds before the alert. The room was empty and still. Then, at the edge of the frame, something changed. The hallway darkened. It was subtle at first. The shadows seemed to thicken, pooling near the floor. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse quickening. A shape emerged from the darkness. It didn't step into the room. It didn't move like a person walking. It was more like the darkness itself was stretching, forming an outline that almost resembled a human figure. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The shape stood at the threshold of the hallway, perfectly still. The camera's timestamp ticked forward, 1 second, 2, 3, then the figure tilted its head. The motion was slow and deliberate, as if it were studying the camera. A sharp jolt of fear shot through me. I dropped the phone onto my chest, my heart hammering. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a glitch. My mind was filling in details that weren't there. With trembling fingers, I picked up the phone and replayed the clip. The figure was still there. I watched it again and again, searching for a rational explanation. Each time the same thing happened. The darkness gathered, formed that impossible silhouette, and tilted its head. The clip ended with the figure retreating into the hallway. The shadows returned to normal, leaving the living room empty. I lay in bed, frozen. The hallway outside my bedroom was silent. I strained to hear any sign of movement. The house felt different, as if it were holding its breath. After a long minute, I forced myself to get up. Every instinct told me to stay under the covers, but I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. I turned on the bedside lamp. Warm light flooded the room, pushing back the darkness. I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps soft against the floor. "Hello," I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer. I walked to the living room, my eyes darting to every corner. The space looked completely normal. There was no sign of anyone or anything being there. I checked the doors and windows, all locked. A nervous laugh escaped me. I blamed exhaustion and an overactive imagination. Cameras distorted light all the time. It had to be a visual artifact. I went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I reviewed the footage again in the bright light of day. The figure looked less convincing somehow, grainy, ambiguous. I felt embarrassed by how much it had scared me. I almost deleted the clip. Instead, I archived it. That night, I tried to forget about it. I made dinner, watched a show, and double-checked the locks before going to bed. As I turned off the lights, I hesitated. The hallway stretched out before me, dark and quiet. I shook my head and laughed at myself. It was just a hallway. I slept restlessly, drifting in and out of shallow dreams. When my phone vibrated again, I snapped awake instantly. Another motion alert. 2:13 a.m. My blood ran cold. I stared at the notification, my thumb hovering over the screen. A sense of dread settled over me, heavy and suffocating. The exact same time as before. Slowly, I opened the app. The live feed showed the living room, empty, still, but this time I didn't feel relieved. I tapped the recorded clip. The footage began the same way, an empty room, shadows shifting gently. Then the hallway darkened, the shape appeared again. It was clearer this time, taller, more defined. I could make out the suggestion of shoulders, arms hanging loosely at its sides. It stepped forward, the movement was wrong. Its legs didn't bend the way they should. It glided across the floor, covering distance without taking a single visible step. My breath caught in my throat. The figure stopped in the center of the living room. Slowly, it turned toward the camera. I felt an overwhelming certainty that it was looking directly at me. The screen flickered. Static rippled across the image. For a split second, the figure vanished. Then it reappeared much closer to the camera. I flinched, nearly dropping my phone. The figure's head filled most of the frame now. Its features were indistinct, a blur of shifting darkness, but I could sense an intense focus radiating from it. It lined in. The audio crackled to life. A faint sound seeped through the speaker, soft, uneven breathing. Not mine. I realized I was holding my breath. I forced myself to inhale, and the sound from the phone seemed to sync with my own breathing for a horrifying moment before falling out of rhythm again. The figure raised one arm. A long, shadowy finger extended toward the lens, and then the clip ended. I sat in the darkness, my heart racing so hard it hurt. A terrible thought crept into my mind. If the camera saw it in the living room, where was it now? I looked up slowly. My bedroom door was open just a crack. Beyond it, the hallway stretched into darkness. And I could swear the darkness was moving. I stared at the doorway, every muscle in my body locked in place. The darkness in the hallway didn't behave like normal shadows. It pulsed faintly, like something alive was breathing just beyond the edge of my sight. I blinked hard, trying to clear the image, but the sensation didn't fade. My phone was still in my hand. The security app remained open, the last frame of the recording frozen on the screen. The figure's blurred face seemed to press outward, as if it were trying to push through the glass. A sudden thud echoed from somewhere in the apartment. I jerked upright. It came from the living room, a solid, unmistakable sound like something heavy being set down. My pulse roared in my ears. I told myself it could be anything. A book falling, the building settling, but deep down I knew better. My thumb hovered over the live feed button. Every instinct screamed at me not to press it. If I didn't look, maybe it wouldn't be real. I pressed it anyway. The camera took a second to load. The spinning icon felt like it lasted forever. When the image finally appeared, my stomach dropped. The living room was not empty. The figure stood directly in front of the camera. It was closer than before, filling most of the frame. The air around it shimmered faintly, distorting the background. I couldn't make out clear features, but I felt an overwhelming impression of eyes fixed on me. Watching, the figure didn't move. It didn't need to. Its stillness was worse than any sudden motion. It felt patient, certain. Then slowly it raised its head. The angle shifted just enough for me to see past it, down the hallway. The camera's perspective lined up perfectly with my bedroom door. With me, a cold wave of understanding washed over me. The camera wasn't just showing me the living room. It was showing me that the figure could see me too. My hand trembled so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I scrambled out of bed and slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it with shaking fingers. The click of the lock sounded painfully loud in the silence. I backed away until my legs hit the bed and I collapsed onto it, my chest heaving. The phone buzzed again, another notification. Motion detected, hallway camera. I stared at the alert, dread pooling in my stomach. I had forgotten about the hallway camera. With slow, mechanical movements, I opened the feed. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The hallway was empty, perfectly normal. The door to my bedroom stood closed, the light from under it forming a thin line across the floor. Then the image flickered. For a fraction of a second, the figure stood right outside my door. I gasped. The screen returned to normal, the hallway empty again. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. The image flickered a second time. The figure was closer. Its head was tilted slightly, the same way it had been in the first recording. As if it were listening, the feed stabilized. Empty hallway. A soft sound drifted through the door. A faint scraping noise like fingertips brushing against wood. My breath hitched. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Tears stung my eyes as panic clawed its way up my throat. The phone buzzed again, another flicker on the hallway camera. This time the figure was pressed against the door. Its outline was clearer than ever. I could see the suggestion of a face inches from the wood, as though it were trying to peer through. One arm was raised, its hand resting flat against the surface. The doorknob rattled gently. I let out a strangled sob and stumbled backward. My mind raced for something, anything I could do. Calling for help felt useless. I couldn't explain this to anyone. I barely understood it myself. The rattling stopped. Silence settled over the room, thick and oppressive. Seconds stretched into an eternity. I kept my eyes glued to the hallway feed, waiting for the next flicker. When it came, the hallway was empty. The figure was gone. I didn't feel relieved. The absence felt wrong, like a held breath waiting to be released. I scanned the image frantically, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. A new notification appeared. Motion detected, living room camera. My heart sank. With numb fingers, I switched feeds. The living room camera showed the figure standing in the center of the room again, but something had changed. Its posture was different, straighter, more defined, and in its hand it was holding something. It took me a moment to recognize the object. It was my phone. I stared at the screen in confusion. My phone was in my hand. I could feel its weight, the warmth of it against my palm, but the figure was undeniably holding an identical device. The screen glowed faintly, illuminating the shadowy contours of its arm. The camera angle shifted slightly as the figure raised the phone. I saw my own bedroom on its screen. The perspective was impossible. It was showing the inside of my room from a corner near the ceiling, a vantage point I didn't have a camera in. I could see myself sitting on the bed, pale and shaking, staring at my own phone. A cold realization settled over me. It was watching me watch it, the figure's head tilted again. On its screen, I saw myself do the same a split second later, an involuntary mirror of its movement. My stomach twisted. A dizzying sense of vertigo washed over me, as if the room were folding in on itself. The lights flickered. I looked up instinctively. The lamp beside my bed buzzed and dimmed, casting erratic shadows across the walls. For a moment I thought I saw those shadows stretching unnaturally, reaching toward me. When I looked back at the phone, the living room feed was gone. The screen was black. A message appeared in small white text, "Connection lost." "No," I whispered. The word came out hoarse and broken. I tapped the screen repeatedly, trying to reconnect. The app refused to load. The scraping sound returned, louder this time. It was coming from inside the room. Every drop of blood in my body seemed to freeze. I turned my head slowly, my gaze sweeping across the dark corners of the bedroom. The sound came again. A slow, deliberate drag against the wall behind me. I couldn't bring myself to look. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of my phone, my eyes wide with terror. Behind my reflection, something shifted. A shape rising from the corner of the room. My breath caught. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The corner was empty. But the air felt disturbed, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. My phone buzzed one last time. A final notification appeared, not from the security app, but as a plain text message. There was no sender listed, just 3 words. Turn around slowly. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the phone. A hot tear slid down my cheek. Every instinct told me to run, to scream, to do anything but follow that instruction. But another feeling rose up beneath the fear. A terrible, irresistible certainty that if I didn't look, it would be worse. I took a shaky breath and I began to turn. I turned slowly, every inch of movement feeling heavy and unreal. For a moment I saw nothing. The room looked exactly the same. The pale light from the lamp washed over the walls. My closet door was half open. Clothes hung motionless inside. The corner where I thought I'd seen movement was empty. A shaky breath escaped me. Then the temperature in the room dropped. It wasn't gradual. One second the air was warm and stale, the next it was biting cold. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I could see my breath fog faintly in front of me, and in that fog a shape began to form. It started as a distortion, like heat rippling above asphalt, but inverted, a cold shimmer that bent the air. The distortion thickened, darkening into a familiar silhouette. The figure stepped forward from the corner. It wasn't coming from the wall, it was coming through it. I couldn't scream. The sound died in my throat. My body refused to move as the figure emerged fully into the room. Up close, it was taller than I expected, its proportions subtly wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an angle that should have been impossible. And yet, the most horrifying part wasn't its shape. It was the feeling that washed over me as it faced me. Recognition, a crushing sense of familiarity settled in my chest. I knew this presence, not like you know another person, but like you know your own reflection, intimately, inescapably. The figure raised its head. Where its face should have been, the darkness shifted and peeled back like smoke in a breeze. For a split second, I saw features emerging from the void, my features. I staggered back, my heel catching on the edge of the bed. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the floor with a dull thud, but I barely noticed. My entire world had narrowed to the thing standing in front of me. It wore my face like a blurred mask. The details were wrong, smeared and indistinct, but the resemblance was undeniable. Its eyes, my eyes locked onto mine. A pressure built inside my skull, sharp and sudden. Images flashed behind my eyes. I saw myself sitting in the living room earlier that evening, scrolling through my phone. I saw myself installing the cameras days before, testing the angles. I saw moments from my life unfolding in rapid, disjointed fragments, except some of them weren't memories. They were things I hadn't done yet. I saw myself standing in the same bedroom, but older. More tired, I saw the cameras mounted in different positions, covering every inch of the apartment. I saw myself staring at the screens obsessively, my eyes ringed with dark circles. The visions came faster, blurring together. Nights spent watching empty rooms, jumping at every flicker of movement, sleeping with the lights on. The figure took another step closer. The pressure in my head intensified. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. I clutched my temples, gasping, and then I understood. The cameras hadn't attracted it, they had created it. Every moment I spent watching those feeds, every ounce of fear and attention I poured into the empty spaces of my home, it had shaped something, given form to the darkness I kept staring into. And now it was standing in front of me. The figure reached out. Its hand hovered inches from my face. The air around its fingers felt heavy, thick with static. I could feel a pull emanating from it, a gentle but irresistible tug. My thoughts began to blur at the edges. The room felt distant, unreal. All I could focus on was that outstretched hand and the endless darkness swirling beneath its surface. A whisper echoed in my mind, not a voice I heard with my ears, but a thought that wasn't my own. Watch. My gaze snapped to the floor where my phone lay. The screen had lit up on its own. The security app was open again, displaying the bedroom camera, the camera I didn't remember installing. The feed showed the room from the ceiling corner. It showed me standing frozen in front of the figure, its hand extended toward my face, but there was something else in the frame. Behind me in the doorway, another shadow was forming. It was smaller, less defined, a faint echo of the figure in front of me. As I watched, it solidified, its outline sharpening. It was mimicking my posture. My breath hitched. A horrible realization dawned on me. The figure in front of me wasn't just a creation of my fear, it was a mold, and I was filling it. The shadow in the doorway took a hesitant step forward, copying my stance exactly. When I trembled, it trembled. When my chest rose with a shaky breath, so did its. The figure reached out again, its fingertip brushing my forehead. The world tilted. Suddenly, I was looking at the room from the camera's perspective. I could see myself standing there, eyes wide and vacant, the figure's hand pressed against my skin. The shadow in the doorway loomed closer, growing darker, more substantial. I tried to move, to scream, to do anything, but I was trapped behind the lens, a silent observer. The version of me in the room smiled. It was a small, unnatural curve of the lips. My stomach twisted as I realized I wasn't controlling it. The figure lowered its hand and stepped back. The pressure in my mind eased slightly, but the connection remained. I was tethered to that viewpoint, forced to watch as my body turned toward the doorway, toward the shadow. They faced each other like reflections in a distorted mirror. The shadow's features sharpened, resolving into my likeness. Its eyes glinted with a hollow curiosity. My body raised a hand in greeting. The shadow mirrored the gesture, their fingertips touched. A ripple passed through the room, the air warped, bending around them. The shadow surged forward, flowing into my body like ink spilled into water. The moment they merged, I felt a violent jolt. I was slammed back into myself. I collapsed to the floor, air rushing from my lungs in a ragged gasp. The room spun wildly. For a few disorienting seconds, I couldn't tell what was real. The figure was gone, the bedroom was empty. The lamp glowed steadily. The air was warm again. My phone lay on the floor, its screen dark and lifeless. I pushed myself up on trembling arms, my heart racing. Every part of me expected the figure to reappear, to step out of the shadows and finish whatever it had started, but nothing happened. Silence filled the room. Slowly, shakily, I stood. My legs felt weak, unsteady beneath me. I scanned every corner of the bedroom, half convinced this was another illusion. It all looked normal. Too normal. I picked up my phone with unsteady fingers and opened the security app. The feeds loaded instantly. The living room, the hallway, the front door, all empty, no recordings, no alerts. It was as if the entire night had been erased. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat, but I swallowed it down. My reflection stared back at me from the screen. My face looked pale and drawn, my eyes wide and haunted. For a split second, my reflection smiled. I dropped the phone with a choked cry. It clattered against the floor, the screen flashing briefly before going dark again. I stared at it, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. When I finally forced myself to pick it up, the reflection was normal, just me. I told myself it was over. I told myself I was safe. But as I stood there in the quiet of my bedroom, a new sensation crept in, subtle but undeniable. I didn't feel alone inside my own head anymore. At first, the sensation was faint. It felt like a thought hovering just outside my awareness, a presence sitting quietly in the back of my mind. I tried to ignore it. I convinced myself it was just leftover fear, the echo of a nightmare clinging to me after I'd woken up. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lights on, my phone clutched in my hand, watching the security feeds. Every room remained empty. The stillness should have comforted me. Instead, it felt staged. Around sunrise, exhaustion finally dragged me into a shallow, restless sleep. When I woke a few hours later, sunlight streamed through the curtains. The apartment looked ordinary, peaceful. I almost believed it had all been a hallucination. I went through my morning routine in a daze, brushing my teeth, making coffee. Each action felt automatic, distant. And all the while, that quiet presence lingered in the back of my mind, watching. When I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, my stomach tightened. I studied my own face, searching for something different, something wrong. For a moment, everything was normal. Then my reflection blinked a fraction of a second too late. I stumbled back, my heart lurching. I stared at the mirror, my breath shallow and uneven. My reflection stared back, perfectly synchronized again. I told myself it was a trick of perception. My nerves were frayed, my brain was misfiring after a traumatic night, but the presence in my mind stirred and a wave of cold certainty washed over me. It was still there. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I avoided the mirrors in my apartment. I avoided the cameras. Even the thought of opening the app made my chest tighten. By evening, the silence inside my head had grown heavier. The presence wasn't passive anymore. It pressed gently against my thoughts, like a hand testing the strength of a door. I felt it when I reached for my phone, a subtle resistance, a hesitation that didn't feel like my own. My thumb hovered over the security app. Every instinct screamed at me to delete it, to rip the cameras out of the walls and throw them away. But another impulse rose to meet that fear, a calm, steady curiosity. Watch, a thought whispered. My thumb moved on its own. The app opened. All three feeds loaded at once. The living room, the hallway, the bedroom. For a split second, they were empty. Then I saw it. In the bedroom feed, I was standing in the doorway, staring at my phone. I wasn't in the doorway, I was in the kitchen. My breath caught. Slowly, I looked up from the screen and toward the hallway. The doorway to my bedroom was empty. I looked back at the phone. The version of me in the feed smiled. A wave of vertigo slammed into me. The room tilted, my vision swimming. The presence in my mind surged forward, filling my thoughts with a cold, electric hum. The figure behind the camera, the version of me on the screen, stepped into the bedroom. The feed followed smoothly, as if carried by invisible hands. It was exploring. Through the camera, I watched it move around my room, touching objects with a strange, detached curiosity. My chest tightened with a suffocating sense of violation. It was using my face, my body. And I couldn't stop it. I tried to drop the phone. My fingers refused to open. Panic clawed at my throat as the presence wrapped around my thoughts, soothing and insistent. "It's okay," it seemed to say. "This is what you wanted to see." The realization hit me like a blow. It was right, I had wanted to see. I had installed the cameras to watch every dark corner of my home. I had fed my fear with endless observation, staring into the empty spaces and waiting for something to appear. And something had answered. The feed shifted abruptly. The camera turned toward the lens, toward me. The version of me on the screen leaned in close. Its eyes filled the display, dark and unreadable. I felt a pressure building behind my own eyes, a painful stretching sensation. The boundary between the screen and my mind began to blur. Memories that weren't mine flooded in. I saw myself through the camera's perspective, standing in the kitchen, pale and trembling. I felt a detached curiosity about that figure, about me. The roles were reversing. "No," I whispered, my voice shaking. The sound felt distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears. The presence pressed harder. Watch, it insisted. My vision tunneled. The edges of the world dissolved into static. I felt myself slipping, my awareness being pulled toward the glowing rectangle in my hands. And then, with a final, desperate surge of will, I did the only thing I could think of. I closed my eyes. The connection snapped like a stretched wire breaking. The pressure vanished. The roaring silence in my ears faded. I sagged against the counter, my body shaking with adrenaline. My phone slipped from my limp fingers and hit the floor. The screen went dark. I didn't pick it up. I stood there with my eyes closed, focusing on the rhythm of my breathing. In, out, in, out. The presence in my mind had retreated again, shrinking back into a distant murmur, but it was still there. Waiting, I opened my eyes slowly. The apartment was quiet, normal. My phone lay face down on the tile. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that if I picked it up and looked at the screen again, it would be waiting for me, watching. I turned away from it. That night, I didn't sleep in the apartment. I left the lights on, grabbed my keys, and walked out without looking back. I told myself I would return with tools, with help, with anything I needed to remove the cameras. But a small, terrified part of me understood the truth. The cameras were just the doorway. And I had already opened it. Even now, I can feel it sometimes. In quiet moments when the world goes still and my thoughts begin to wander, I sense that familiar presence shifting in the back of my mind. Patient, curious, watching through my eyes. And I don't check security cameras anymore. I don't install devices that stare into dark rooms. I avoid reflections that linger a second too long, because I learned something that night. Some things don't need an invitation to enter your home. They just need you to look for them. Even today, when I'm alone and everything around me falls completely silent, I feel like something is watching me, not through any camera or screen, but from within. As if something else is seeing the world through my own eyes. I've never opened that app again. I removed the cameras. But sometimes when I suddenly wake up in the middle of the night, it feels like I'm not alone. I don't know what it really was. Maybe fear, maybe the darker side of my own mind. But one thing I know for certain, there are some things you shouldn't look into too deeply, because if they realize you're searching for them, they might start searching for you.